Hello my fellow land dwellers, it is I, Ewan of What Culture, and hey, remember that fishy kid you used to bully back in high school? Well, he got big. Really big. Like, I'm in awe of the size of this lad big. Not content with being the king of Atlantis, Aquaman is now the king of the box office, becoming just the 9th comic book movie in history and the first DC film since The Dark Knight Rises in 2012 to gross over $1 billion worldwide. It marks one heck of a turnaround for the character, who not so long ago was the butt of Entourage's jokes. It also marks an impressive upturn in fortunes for the DC Extended Universe, considering its previous film, Justice League, made just over $650 million. There are a number of factors that led Aquaman to breaking the $1 billion barrier. Not least the fact James Wan created a DC superhero movie that dared to have a whole lot of fun. I know, what a strange concept. Now that it has grossed so much money after just a few weeks in Christmas, talk is turning to the future of DC on the big screen. Aquaman was the last movie in development before Justice League's failure, and its success should signal a lot of changes and a real path forward for Warner Brothers, who, until now, had been lagging behind the MCU. Number 7, there'll definitely be an Aquaman 2. The first implication of Aquaman's success is a fairly straightforward one. There will definitely be an Aquaman 2. Unless already confirmed as a closing chapter, it's unheard of for a comic book movie to gross $1 billion and not get a follow-up. Even before the film was released, it was reported that a sequel was already in the early stages of development based on its strong tracking at the box office. Now that it's actually made that money, the sequel is guaranteed and will likely arrive sooner rather than later to maximize its hype. It should certainly be in cinemas no later than 2021, if not sooner with a push. Luckily, Aquaman also contains plenty of setup for a future installment. Black Manta, the secondary antagonist of the first flick, is practically beginning to be the lead villain in an Aqua film, but on top of that, there's plenty more character work and story potential in Arthur Curry being the king of Atlantis, and the development of Orm into someone who isn't actually a bad guy. That's on top of decades of comic storylines to draw from too, meaning a sequel, even a trilogy, have plenty of places to go from here, and will now happen with plans in motion for follow-ups. Also, we still haven't seen Aquaman with the hook hand, aka the coolest version of the character going, so DC, get on that right now. Number 6, more standalone films will follow. Through its first phase, the DCEU has very much attempted to play catch-up with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which has negatively affected both its box office and its critical reception. It's notable, though, that the movies that play the most into team-up events and the idea of a shared universe are the ones to always fall flattest. Batman v Superman, Suicide Squad, and Justice League 2. Wonder Woman had a strong box office and great reviews, and now Aquaman's landed with great box office and strong reviews too. There were already signs that DC were pivoting more to these solo outings, but Aquaman should usher in even more of them. Shazam and Joker are both on the way anyway, but this should give Warner Brothers much greater confidence in tackling further standalone movies that break away from the shared universe concept and work in isolation. Obviously, that includes the Batman, if that ever comes, and Wonder Woman 1984, but also some more risky and out there properties that they may have not been willing to work on had Aquaman bombed. Booster Gold, yes. Blue Beetle, also yes. Nightwing, Batgirl, and even a Green Lantern Corps movie all just saw their chances of actually happening and working increase exponentially. Number 5, it's moving away from Zack Snyder's vision. While there are still elements in there that Snyder himself likely would have wanted and even helped inject when he started establishing the character in Justice League, the tone of the movie and the way it approaches its superhero is very different to the grimdark Frank Miller-esque deconstruction that Snyder typically favoured, both in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. A lot of that is to do with James Wan as a filmmaker who, although known for his work in horror, is an actor with a keen eye for action and infused infusing that with comedy too. And while it's unlikely Aquaman changed too much because of Justice League, it was in the works well before that was released, its success gives affirmation to the sensibilities Aquaman brings to the table. This works by being funnier and goofier, and while that should vary from movie to movie, Shazam needs to be a bit silly, the Batman much less so, it's the biggest indicator yet that moving away from SYNDER'S is the DCEU's new MO. Depending on how you felt about the DCEU to begin with, this is going to be either a plus or a negative, but there's no denying the franchise was in need of a more diverse array of tones, like the source material it adapts. Instead, it was previously just one thing. Now it's something much, much stronger. Number 4, it's not entirely departing the DCEU either. Aquaman should lead to a greater onus on standalone superhero movies, and more varied, and lighter, tones and aesthetics. But what it also does is confirm that the DCEU can, and indeed does, actually work. This movie wasn't a knee-jerk response to the failure of others, but was still born out of the original plans for that universe, and Aquaman is a Justice League character. If it had failed, then it might have killed the shared universe completely. Instead, thanks to it being a success, it leaves the door open for more stories within the DCEU, rather than an increasing amount of Elseworld-style storylines, which we're going to see with the Joker. There's a good chance Warner Bros. Will see that as positive reinforcement for some elements of the DCEU, giving them more urgency and faith in the likes of Suicide Squad 2 and Birds of Prey. In a sense, it'll allow them to have their cake and eat it. They can keep things loosely related, with an eye on a team-up should they sense the appetite for one, without having the shared universe aspects feel overly forced, and allowing the movies to all be distinct and do their own thing without worrying too much about canon or maintaining continuity. Number 3, embracing the weirdness of DC Comics. There's a reason many assumed Aquaman simply wouldn't work on the big screen. In the comics, he's an inherently silly character, from his scaly gold and green appearance to the fact he's a guy who talks to fish. Hell, he's a dude who milked a cow with an octopus one time. Don't ask, we try not to judge. Put simply, DC Comics isn't afraid to get really weird. There's all kinds of zaniness on the page, little of which has been translated to screen before so many of the movies, since Nolan revived Batman in 2005 at least, have adhered to the gritty, dark and serious tone of the Dark Knight trilogy. Aquaman, however, decides to completely flip this and avoids falling into the pitfall of making Aquaman so cool that in itself feels kind of weird. It knows that it has a weird superhero who talks to fish, and so completely embraces that aspect. Okay, the octopus may not milk a cow, but it does still appear, and play the drums no less, itself a reference to Aquaman's comics Octo Buddy, Topo. That's good news for the future too, because it signals that weird does work, and DC are ready to go in on that aspect. There are obviously chances for that in both Shazam and Joker, but going into the future we should see a DC unafraid to get a little wild and wacky. No one's asking for a clone of Marvel, but to act like DC had to be this overly serious counterweight to their rivals was always silly. DC owns certain aspects of the superhero genre more so than the House of Ideas, and if they can embrace that wholeheartedly, they'll be competing properly in no time at all. Number 2, Batman and Superman are less important. The two biggest successes of the DCEU so far are Aquaman, commercially, and Wonder Woman, critically. What that also means is that those biggest successes have come without the two biggest DC characters, and two of the three biggest comic book characters ever created for that matter, Batman and Superman. They were, understandably, the two characters this universe was being built around, both at their iterations intrinsically tied to Zack Snyder's Miller-esque vision. And just as Aquaman shows they're past that, its box office also shows it's grown beyond its two best-known heroes. There isn't a Superman movie in the works currently, and that's not going to change anytime soon when Aquaman's making $1 billion at the box office. There is a Batman movie, but it's not yet close to production, and this will actually help it too. With less reliance on that to be something to compete with Nolan's movies, Matt Reeves can hopefully be allowed to make something a little bit smaller and more personal, and potentially showcase a truly definitive Dark Knight on the big screen, as opposed to the fella who brands people like a psychotic farmer and mows them down in his big tankmobile. Going further into the future, and it should only solidify their slate going forward. Batman and Superman haven't performed well because there are so many versions, and the new ones will be negatively compared. To audiences, Aquaman is completely fresh, which is a big part in why they've taken to him so well now. What it shows really, however, is that it's now time for Warner Brothers to push forward with all their quote-unquote new heroes, because Aquaman proves the desire is there. And number 1, it's on the right track. Since its inception with Man of Steel way back in 2013, the DCEU has constantly been fighting. Man of Steel's relative lack of success meant it was almost 3 years before another DC film was released, and the DCEU's proper launch flopped even harder than its soft one. Ever since then, there's been a seemingly constant struggle to put things right, stemming from changes in director to much broader challenges like defining what the DCEU actually is and should be. In terms of universe, tone, and having a cohesive approach, it's all been a bit of a mess, but Aquaman should offer a lot of hope for the future. This is a movie that isn't afraid to get weird, have fun, tell jokes, and just be plain colourful, and yet it's not a complete betrayal of what Snyder started either, but simply a sensible shift of direction. It nails the exact right tone, not just for the character, but for the universe, and yet isn't the product of a knee-jerk reaction to a box office flop, but rather an organic process with clear direction. It's an ideal meld of director, actor, and character. For those who want references, it acknowledges a wider universe, but completely works as a standalone movie too. Compared to previous DCEU movies, it feels like a breath of fresh air and shows exactly what they should be doing and how they should be doing it. And that, in taking the same approach as Aquaman, you can have both critical and commercial success. The DCEU's been directionless for way too long, but Aquaman puts it firmly on the right track. As a DC fan myself, you have no idea how happy that makes me. But I want to know how you think Aquaman will change the DCEU going forward. Will we get others of its ilk? Is that a good thing? Or should WB stick with what they've previously done so far? Please let me know down in the comments below. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and head back on over to whatculture.com for more of this sort of thing every day. As always, I've been Ewan, and I'll see you next time. Bye!